Hi guys, I'm Stuart and welcome back to another video. Now recently Kiku hit us up to do a water cooling tutorial video which we did a few months ago. Now Kiku have hit us up again to do a part 2 on this video. So what you're going to see in this video is we're trying to separate it from the first video to the second one. This one we want to focus on more specific areas, things like bending and cutting your water cooling tube, things like fittings, the different sizes, and water cooling maintenance. So if you haven't seen the first video, I recommend going and checking that one out. I'm sure the guys will link it somewhere in this post, in this video somewhere. But yeah, the first video pretty much covered on setting a computer up fully for water cooling, installing blocks and whatnot, whereas this one is more sort of, we've already done all the blocks and all that off camera. And then this one, we just jump in straight to the best layout for running a loop, cutting your tube and bending it and all that. So I don't want to spend any more time just going over this. I want to jump straight in. This is going to be a relatively long video. I have tried to cover as much as I can. So first off, we'll jump in and we'll have a look at all the hardware that we're using for this build. I do like to outline everything we've used, and then I will outline the water cooling gear that we've used as well. But I'm not going to go through every single fitting and things like that. We'll throw that in the description or on the page as well, just to help you out. So I just want to thank some of the sponsors for this. So I'll go through the hardware and we can see what we've used in this system. All right, so the case we're using for this build is the Coolmaster Master Case Maker. So this is the latest case in their Master Case range. We've got two GTX Strix 980 video cards, we've got some Avexia Blitz DDR4 memory, an Intel Core i7-6700K processor. We have the relatively new Maximus 8 Hero Alpha. Now that is really good because we've tested the pump header feature on that and that works really good. And then we got a Seasonic Platinum 1200 watt power supply, and then we have the WD hard drive and Avexia SSD. Now moving on to the water cooling gear, we've gone with Alphacool radiators as well. For all blocks and fittings, we've gone with Bitspower. So you can see we've got Bitspower CPU block, Bitspower GPU blocks. We've gone with the Bitspower pump and res combos, standard D5 pump, which we use in most of our builds. We've gone with the Thermaltake Blue C1000. This is their new opaque coolant, and we've gone with Blue Thermaltake fans as well. And as I said earlier, we will specify all the fittings in the description just to help you out. Okay guys, now we've got our system built up to roughly similar following the previous video we did a few months back. So we've got all the gear in. We're not going to go through that process again. If you want to know how to install the radiators, the CPU block and whatnot into the system, it's probably best to check out the previous video. I don't see the need to go over that again. I want to cover some more specific areas with water cooling, and what you see here is the first area I want to cover, and that are the different type of fittings and choosing the right fittings for your build. Now bear in mind, there's no right type of fittings for your build. It's completely up to you and what you want to go by. Now I want to sort of break this up in, there's a few types of fittings, and these are quite important because fittings will consume nearly most of your budget, or about half of your budget, when it comes to choosing your water cooling items. Because about in this area here, there's probably a couple $100 worth of fittings, and these aren't probably all the fittings you're going to need. Now I want to break this up into the two right ones over here are your mandatory fittings, and moving slightly to your left are your less mandatory, more luxury fittings. So when I mean mandatory, I mean things like stop fittings and your end fittings for tubing to go into. Things like stop fittings are a must. You can't have ports that aren't sort of stopped with a fitting, and you need your end fittings for your tubing to plug into. Then moving down to more of your like dual rotary swivel ones, just to make your build look nicer and a bit easier. Some you don't need, some like these ones. These ones are about $15, $20 upwards for a dual rotary. Now that is a lot, so you're not going to be wanting to stick these on every single right angle on your system. All right, now, first of all, I want to cover the two different endpoints on a fitting. Nearly every fitting has two ends to it, except for the stop fittings. They're simply just a plug to stop the coolant from running out, because there's many things that have multiple ports. Radiators have multiple ports, video cards have multiple ports, and you don't always use them. The ones you're not using, you simply just bang in a stop fitting and tighten it up. That is it. Now I want to cover the thread size. Back in the old days there were many thread sizes, but today pretty much the standard is a G-quarter thread. As you can see, all these fittings have a male thread. This is G-quarter. I think you can still buy, I think it's 3/8 or a weird size thread, but 99% of the things, this is a Bitspower pack, it says G-quarter. So something to bear in mind that I have seen on the Bitspower site, you can get some other sizes, but there's very, very limited quantity of those. 99% of everything is G-quarter. Now the reason why G-quarter is, everything on your system or your radiator ports, your GPU ports, your CPU block ports are G-quarter as well. So they will match up and these will simply screw in. But it is a good check just not to take that for granted. Just make sure that everything says G-quarter. Then moving on to the other end of your fitting, we have a female G-quarter. Now you can get converters to go from G-quarter to something else, but in these days, if you stick everything to G-quarter, you will be fine. You don't have to worry about converters and using old radiators which have different thread sizes. Most of the time, you're going to have a male and then a female. So these are simply extenders. These are if you want to make some crazy sort of contraption to go around corners and things like that. Now the other areas where we don't have a G-quarter on both ends, ones like your tube fitting. So whether you're using rigid, flexi, things like that, they will have one end on the fitting designed for tubing, and one end, once again, is your G-quarter for screwing into your device like a radiator and whatnot. So the ones I have here are 12mm. These are the Bitspower C47 fittings. So these have the inside diameter of here is 12mm, and these are designed for your 12mm hard tube, whether it's PETG, acrylic or whatnot. These are designed for that, and these just simply push straight into the end of the fitting, and we'll show you that later on, because I'm going to cover bending and cutting the tube as well. I just want to cover the fittings at this stage. So yeah, so these ones don't have the G-quarter thread on each side. The other side is for your tubing, like I said. And now bear in mind, you can get different ends to cater for different tubing. These ones over here are 16mm, so these will take 16mm outer diameter for your hard tubing. Now I'm not going to cover flexi tubing, because that's sort of a whole new world, because you need to worry about inner and outer. Because if you're using compression fittings, you need to know the inner diameter for your tube to push on, and you need to know the outer diameter for the locking ring to screw on. But yeah, that's pretty much what these done with these fittings. We'll have a look at our build now, and we'll go on and just see. What I want to do is try and do this build with the least amount of fittings as possible, because not everyone's going to want to spend $500–600 on fittings, just to make it a little bit easier when it comes to tubing up. What I want to do is go the other way. I want to use the least amount of fittings, so I'm going to mainly focus on these. These are the must ones, these are the must ones, and maybe a few little right angles to keep it a little bit simpler. But I want to do some of my own bends. I want to show you how easy it is to, if you keep each line or each tube run with one single bend. So say you need to go to a radiator to a CPU block, you can get away most of the times with using 1 or 2 fittings and doing one bend. And that's easy, because when you're doing only one bend in the hard tube, you don't have to worry about crazy measurements and getting it all right. You can simply bend it and then cut each length down to size. All right, so what we'll do now is I'm going to throw these fittings in the build. We'll go over the build just before I do that, so we can just see the rough layout I'm going to do. We'll throw these fittings on, and then we'll move over to sort of cutting the tubing and the different ways to cut and bend the hard tubing. So now we've got the hardware and the water cooling gear in the case. If you're not familiar at getting up to this stage or up to speed, it's probably best to check out our previous video that we did a few months ago, because that'll cover those few areas. So we don't want to redo all of that, because it'll just make this video just way too long. So we've got the 2 GPUs, we've got the motherboard, we've got the blocks on those, and then we've got our 2 radiators. Now for a system like this, you're water cooling 3 devices, the CPU, the 2 GPUs, you're going to want at least 2 radiators, so at least 2 240mm radiators. So we've gone with a 360 on the front and a 240 up the top. So that'll give us ample cooling for these 3 devices. Now for the reservoir and pump, I've gone with the Bitspower reservoir pump combo, which is the reservoir top with your pump and your pump cooler. Now I will list, or I'll get Kit Guru to list all the water cooling specs out in the either on the web page they do with this, or in the description of the video, because I must admit, when it comes to choosing, especially with water cooling, especially with Bitspower gear, it's one of the most difficult on finding what gear goes with what items, especially when it comes to this assembly with the pump, the reservoir and the cooler and all that. I really do like them. They're a really nice streamlined unit, but they can be quite complex when choosing them and purchasing them. All right, so now we've got everything in. I do like to do the loop, or at least spec out the loop with the hardware in, especially if you're new to water cooling, especially things like RAM, your power supply. If say you're doing a system where the pump's down below, it gives you an idea of where you can and cannot run your tubing and install radiators and things like that. Whereas if you start with a completely bare system and start with your radiators and stuff like that, you could run into areas like you might have tall RAM, you might hit your RAM, and you might be limiting some of the other areas you can use. All right, so what I've done, I've lined up most of the things the best I can. In the Coolmaster Mastercase Pro, this is the Maker case, everything seems to line up with your radiator port. So it's nice that the front radiator and the top radiator are both in line. One's not further apart. So these two ports and these two ports line up perfectly. So I'll be using one of these to go to the radiator. Now, before I sort of move on to anywhere else, I want to mention that a lot of people do ask, all right, so now I've got two radiators. Do I run the CPU into one radiator, then go to the GPUs, and then go to another radiator? They sort of say, is it best to have a radiator in between each device you're cooling? It doesn't make any difference if you have a CPU radiator, video card radiator, all separate, or if you want to have 3 radiators in a row and then your 3 devices. Because when you think about it, when you're running your system for an extended period of time, your temperature is going to get to an average temperature. You can't have cold and hot spots inside your loop. You can't have an area around your CPU running so much hotter than an area around your video card. It all evens out to the same temperature. So I'll be linking these two radiators together. I won't be putting, say, the 2 GPUs in the middle and then the CPU after the other radiator. All right, now moving on to some of the other areas. I've lined this up so we don't have to use a heap of our angled fittings. I'm going to try and do a bit of a diagram of what my loop will look like, sort of overlay it over here. It's nothing too crazy. Each tube run is going to have one bend or no bends. Up here it's going to be tight, it's just going to be a straight bend. This is where fittings come in handy, where you don't have room to bend, because mind you, when you do bend hard tubing, you're not going to be able to get a nice sharp radius like that. It's a much more curved angle, so especially in tighter areas, you're really restrictive. But yeah, as you can see, that's how my loop is going to roughly sort of lay out. So similar to that, we have to bear in mind our flow rate, or our direction of flow. So always at the top of your res, you want to be going in at the top of your res, and you want to be coming out at the bottom. So straight away, I know my flow is going to be wanting to go this way. So I'm going to follow this around into the GPUs, up to the GPUs, into the CPU, out of the CPU, into this top radiator, out of this top radiator, into the other front radiator, then out of this radiator into the reservoir, and then it will start again. So what I'll do now, I'll put this case off to the side, and we'll start doing some of the first tubing runs, and we'll start showing you different ways to cut the PETG tubing, and we'll do some bends as well. So I've got our tools laid out in front of us that we need. Now bear in mind, now not all of these are needed. I'll go through the vital tools that you need and the tools that can aid you and make things a bit easier. Now with our system up here, we've gone and put all the fittings into where we think they'll be. What I like to do first is I like to put all the stop fittings in. Stop fittings, they're on areas you're not going to be using, like the multi-ports on radiators, on your video cards around here. So just to get those all in there, because even myself, I have completely filled up a system before and I've left a stop fitting, say at the back of a radiator, which you can't see or something like that. And it is a nightmare to try to stop coolant from pouring everywhere. So it's best to make sure you double check and triple check all your radiators, your blocks have all stop fittings in, and then you do a final check once the system is ready to be filled. All right, now we'll go over the tools here. So what we've got, there's a few main things that make up the tools needed to start your bending and cutting for your rigid tubing. You've got your mandrels, which are all these ones here. These will give you all your perfect angles, your 180s, your 360s, your 90s and things like that. Now bear in mind, you don't have to have these. If you're going to do a fancy multi-bend, you normally just do that by hand because you can't get the right bend out of these, but these are to aid you and to get you the best type of bend that you're after. Now I like to screw, these all have holes in them. I like to screw the one down I'm using on a board. Then I can just heat my tube up and then I can just line it, lay it down flat on the board and then bend it to the curve that I need. Now then we've also got things like these cutters. This is a Thermaltake cutter for a 16mm tube for the outer diameter 16mm. Other forms of cutters, you can use a Dremel. I like to use this wireless Dremel. It is a little bit messy. You can use a hacksaw. Now bear in mind this has a sort of an acrylic blade on. You want to use very fine blades, lots of teeth when you're cutting acrylic or PETG. Then we've got our reamers. This is a must because we're especially using this type of these type of fittings where the tube pushes in. Once you've cut hard tube, it's very sharp on the inside and the outside. So this just simply gives it a nice bezel on the outside and on the inside. So that's what you do once you've got your length cut to size. You give it a few twirls inside and on the outside, and that'll make it not so sharp on the side. So we can go through that once I'm up to that stage. Now you've got your silicone inserts. These are a must. Without these, when you heat up your tubing and bend it, it's just going to collapse, just like you're folding a bit of paper, and it's just going to collapse and you won't get the nice even curve. This just simply goes inside here. Push it in there just enough so you can grab it, and now when you're heating up, say you want to do a bend here, you just leave this in, and then when you do your bend, this will keep the diameter of the tube all the way the same as you're bending it. So you need these. Now I do recommend buying the same brand as your tubing. I've had different, so this is a 12mm inner diameter silicone insert. This is a 12mm as well. This is 12mm tubing, but this one literally does not go any further than that because this is a different brand. So it's best to stick to the same brand of tubing to get the same silicone insert to make sure everything all fits nicely. Don't forget safety goggles. PETG is not so bad because it's a mixture between hard and sort of a rubberized substance. It's not as brittle as acrylic. When you are cutting acrylic, especially with a Dremel, little shards go flying everywhere. So glasses are a must. I just have a bit of a pen to mark out where I'm going to be doing my cuts. I don't normally mark out where I'm going to be doing my bends only because this is a bit hard to get off. If you're doing it where your cuts are, it's not so bad because you won't see it once it's in the fitting. Then the last thing is your heat gun. Now you don't need to go all out and buy a $100 heat gun. This is like, I think the cheapest heat gun I could find, 20 bucks. It's got 2 settings. And what I really do like about this heat gun is it's got this little platform here so it can just stand up like that. And standing up is really nice because then you can just have it freely standing up and then you can just bend your, heat up your tube over the top. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to jump straight in and I'm going to do this bend here. So we're going to go out of the pump res combo. I'm thinking about doing a nice slight 45, so it'll come down a bit and then it'll go straight and it'll go nicely into the bottom of the video card. Now these two are in line with each other. If I look down the back here, this one and this one come out at the same distance, so that's nice. It'll keep it nice and parallel. So I'll jump in and I'll try and film this the best I can of me heating this up and bending it. Because I'm only doing one bend, I can just straight away just do a bend anywhere in this length here. I'll favor it towards one end so I don't waste too much. I can get the bend right and then I can work on cutting it to the right lengths after I've got the bend. So we've got our station set up here. We've got our 45-degree mandrel set up on our board. It's just screwed through. Now we just grab our bit of tube we want. Now I recommend buying more tubing than you think you'll need, especially if it's your first time. This stuff is cheap as chips. You may as well have a few test runs and play around with it instead of just buying just the right amount and you end up wasting some and you have to delay your whole project. So I've just put this in like this. I'm going to do my bend somewhere around here just so I have enough for when I do the bend, also when it goes in to the pump and the GPU. So I'm going to put this on setting 1. Now with, I feel with PETG, you need to heat it up a little bit more. It won't bubble like acrylic. Acrylic will bubble if it gets too hot, but I like to get this nice and sort of flexy. Now when you are twisting it around, you want it at a nice height. You don't want it sitting on top. You want it at a nice height, and you want to try and keep it nice and straight. You don't want to be wobbling it so it gets too out of formed where you want to do the bend. Now I'm going to turn this on here. You're probably not going to hear me too much, but I'll do the best I can because the heat gun is a bit noisy. Alright, so just setting number 1, just slowly turning it. And you can see straight away already it started to heat that, and it's already really flexy. Alright, then I just simply grab it down here, keep that same bend, and just hold it on like that. I like to make sure it's pushed up against there nicely. Turn that off now. Make sure it's up against the mandrel nicely. Then you can sort of take it off if it's a little bit, sort of hard, you can sort of take it off and you can form it a little bit better. But that's our bend there. So you'll probably find out the first few times you do it, you'll probably find out you might get some little lumps on the bottom. It's not perfectly straight on top, but you'll find the more you do it, the easier that gets. It's even hard on the video trying to do it and stretch over. It's nice to do it in a large open area where you're fully focused on doing it, because once it's in this mandrel, you don't want to be moving it, slipping and whatnot, because that'll form little indentations in the tube. Alright, so that's nice and hard now. So now I can just simply pull this out, and that's got a nice bend in the tube there, as you can see, and then that'll just go in the bottom there. So what I'll do is we'll go a little bit closer to our system now, and we'll line this up for our cuts. All right, so now we can sort of line this up, but first off, you'll probably notice that it's a bit too hard to try and get this inside to get this right measurement here. So what I'm going to do is just mark this and cut off. We are going to waste a little bit more than needed, but it's going to be too hard to measure this point down in here because this is actually outside the case. So what I'll do is I'll just go a little bit further than what we need, and I'll just measure this here, just to put a mark there. So now we can go and cut that, and then once we cut that, we'll be able to move it in, and we'll be able to get a better sort of lined up shot. All right, so for cutting this little bit, I'm just going to go with the hacksaw. It'll be a little bit more quieter. So we just simply, pretty much, if you haven't used the hacksaw before, it's quite simple. Just put it on the mark and just go slow. Now we don't really want to slip, especially if you're doing the final cut to go into your tube, because if you slip and it leaves a trail line past where it goes into the tube, you're gonna see the bit of the mark. So that's done like that, very, very simple. And now we'll have a look and see how this goes in the case. Alrighty, so we're back on our case now. So we can see much easier to work with now. We can pretty much get that exactly lined up to where we want it. I'm gonna see if I can just, so we don't want to be like up like this, we don't want to be down like this. We want to try and get this as nice and parallel as we can, and we've got this on a nice swivel. I do like fittings that do have one rotary, especially if they're going to be a right angle, because we have the freedom now to move this. So we could do something like that. What I always do is I always only cut one end at a time, rather than marking both of these and cutting them both, just in case one's not perfect. All right, so that looks pretty good there. So I'm just going to mark these, and then with these type of fittings, all fittings are going to vary in terms of how far the tube goes inside. With these C47 Bitspower ones, the tube goes really close up to where you see it sort of joins onto the next fitting. So I normally do it in line, and then I can do a slight little filing back if that's needed. So what I'll do is I'll cut this. I'm not going to show you cutting it again because that was pretty simple with the hacksaw. I'm just going to do exactly the same. Okay, so one final last little check. Yep, that looks pretty good. So now, as I said before we stick it into the fitting, we just want to do a few turns like that. And then more importantly, on the outside, is going to make a bit of a mess. All right, then we can just clear that off. And then once the whole system's up, before we do fill it, we'll you can run some water through all the tubes just to make sure you get any last little bits of fire filings or little plastic shards that are stuck inside. All right, so now it's going to be on a bit of an angle, as you can see, but what I have to do now is do the best I can to try and get this one sort of lined up with this port, and then we can just mark it. So I'll just mark that one about here, and now I'm going to cut this one exactly the same way. Okay, so that's it there, cut. Nice little bit of length of tube there. Once again, just a few little spins on that, get that nice. Clean that up a bit. Sometimes you can just blow in them to get the bits out. All right, so that's in there, and this one we can just bend, and you just got to make sure you push these in nice and tight. And with the C47, there are no compression sort of latches that go on and screw down. There's a Bitspower C47 are just purely just push-in fittings. I like the C47 because they're really streamlined with the actual other fittings. They don't stick out or protrude over the standard lip of the fitting that it's going onto. So that is that join done, or that link of the build done. So as you can see, nice and parallel with the video cards, nice and parallel with the case. Once this is filled up with water, it'll look really nice, or the coolant we do use. I'm probably going to be using the new Thermaltake pastel, or not pastel, they call it opaque blue. I will be talking about coolants and maintenance later on. I'll be saying, sort of be talking about some of the more appropriate coolants to be using. A lot of these fancy coolants might not necessarily be best for long-term use, sort of things like that, because I don't want people to be going out and grabbing all this fancy stuff and finding out they need to do higher maintenance and things like that. All right, so that's that one done. Let's go and work on a few 90s. So what I'm going to be doing up the top, which you just can't really see, is I'll be doing a 90 up to this rad, and I'll be doing a 90 from this rad to this rad. So let's go and focus on these, and we'll see how they go. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use this waist here. It is very short, but the only link we need it to do is from the CPU block up to that top radiator. So we might be able to get away with it. It's worth a try. If you can get away with using some of your waist, well, why not? We're going to try and do this 90 straight in the center as we can get it. So once again, not too close to the top of the heat gun. All right. Hold it all the way. Now, some of the kits do come with gloves, but I've actually never used gloves before. To me, especially with PETG, it doesn't really get that scorching hot to need gloves. Like I'm touching this now and it's not hot. All right, so there we can see we've got a nice angle. And what I like to do as well, we'll turn this off, is I like to sometimes get a nice straight bit of a board that's got a right angle on it like this. And you can, if you're doing a long straight bit, if it's out a fraction here at this end, it might not be too bad. But when you're going over such a long distance, it can actually be a few centimeters out at the other end. So I just like to have a nice right angle on a board, because when you're doing it like this, there is a bit of a play when you are doing the right angles. All right, so that's it in there nicely. We can take this out like so, and that's it there. So what I'll do now is up in our area we're going to install this, I'll sort of mark this out and we'll see how it goes. Now this one might be a bit hard to see, but here's our right angle bend here. We want to go from the top of the CPU block here up to the back furthest most port on this radiator. So as you can see, it's nearly the right size already. It wasn't too far off. So what we'll do now is we'll cut the height one first. So as you can see, it's nearly the right height. It's going to be too hard for me to mark this here, but I'm just going to see, just needs a fraction taken off the top, and then I'll cut that and we'll stick it in the fitting, and we'll see how well it goes on this side here. All right, so that's in now. I've reamed down the edges and you can see that's looking pretty straight with that fitting. So what I'll do now is, like before, make sure this is all right. Make sure this is nice and parallel. It's not like on a crooked angle like that. Just make sure it's right. Yep. So then we're just going to simply mark like we did before, roughly about here. I tend to always go a little bit further or right on the mark because you can always take a little bit off. You don't want to cut this too short now when you're just about done and you have to do the whole thing again. So now you can see we've got that little bit of tube in there. It goes in really nicely. So we've got nice and parallel with the GPU blocks and we've got it nice and vertical with the sides of the case. So that's that one done. That's the bottom one here done for the GPU. So what we're going to work on now is this front radiator port here along to the other radiator top port there. Now we do have a bit of an advantage with this case is the two radiators line up. So that means we don't have to worry about skewing this port off to line up with this radiator. Cooler Master have thought of that and they've lined your two radiators up. Whereas some cases you might have the front radiator is pushed forward and the top radiator is pushed forward and then your front radiator is normally centered in the case. But with this case, we've got them nice and lined up. But I'm going to do something a bit differently with this one. I'm still going to bend this tube. I'm going to go straight across up into here, but I'm going to bend this one by hand. I'm just going to show you don't need the mandrel aids to do your bends. You can actually all do it by hand. Alrighty, so as I just said, we're going to do the long run from the top radiator port all the way to the other radiator along the front. Now we do need quite a long bit to run the full length of the case, so we don't want to be doing our bend about in the middle. We're going to favor one end only because the bit where it goes in at the top only has to have a little bit of run on it, and then we need a nice long straight bit. So I'm going to sort of aim it at around here somewhere just to make sure we have plenty of length on the other side. So as I said, I'm going to do this bend by hand. I'm going to show you that you don't need all the tools to get a nice right angle bend as well. So we'll just start this up. Just slowly moving it left and right a little bit. So you don't just want to heat up the one spot because when you bend it, it does need quite a bit of an area to bend. So if you just do one little area, you're going to be stretching it when you bend the 90. Alright, so that's like that. So I'm just going to form a nice bend like that. So you can already see how nice that bend is. Now, I've got no sort of depth of field or anything, so what I'm going to do is put it on the table like so, and now I can get it nice and flat so it's not going to warp, and then I can just look straight down on it and get that angle. So I'm not going by any sort of measurements, I'm just purely doing this off the top of my just off the top of my head to see what the best 90 looks like. Okay, so we got our bend here, just like that. I'll pull the silicone insert out. Alrighty, so that'll be going from the top there. We have to cut that down, and you can see it was just enough length to get to the top port up here. Right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to cut it down. We're going to cut this end down first just to make this shorter. It's going to be a bit hard to sort of estimate where this will be because it's in a bit of a tight spot where we can't quite get to it. So I'm just going to have to sort of measure this down and just see what it's going to be like. I'm just going to sort of just mark it down somewhere and then we'll just go from there. Now I've got that cut down to the right height for when it goes across. Now for areas like that, I find it best just to keep on taking a little bit off it at each time at a time until you get to the right height you need. It's in areas like that we can't really measure too well. So it took me about 4 cuts to get that right. It is sort of sloping down a bit, but once you sort of hold that up parallel, it does line up nicely with this other port. So what I'll do now is I'll just simply mark this port over here, and then I'll just cut that one to the right length. Now that's in. You can see how nice that runs along there, nice and parallel to the top fans. I like to keep all my builds, everything nice and sort of symmetrical and parallel. So we've got the nice one along here. You just can't see the one down the bottom, which we did first. That's nice and parallel with the sort of the basement of the case. And then we've got these two that sort of have a nice sort of symmetrical look as they both come down and curve around. Now, one of the next ones we have to do is going to be a little bit tricky. It's this CPU going up from the GPU block into the CPU. So I've got this orientated the right way as our flow is going down here, up here into the CPU block. So this arrow is pointing towards the port, so that means it's has to go in that way. Now this one's going to be a bit tricky because I'm not sure if you can see, but these holes, this port here and this port here isn't exactly perfectly straight. So I just can't do a simple nice 90-degree right angle. You probably could, but it's going to be a bit skewed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to still do the 90, but I'm going to do a little dog leg probably up the top here. So it'll do a dog leg whichever way I need to favor it to go into this port. So I'm going to start doing that now and we'll see how that looks. So I just did that right angle there. I just did that by freehand again. So what I'm going to do now, I'm not going to completely cut this down to size because we still need to do that dog leg. What I'm going to do is get them both roughly to the right size, because when we do the dog leg, it will probably make it a little bit smaller. So we don't want to cut it to size yet. So I'm going to have to do a dog leg this way and try and bring it back towards the left a little bit to try and get it into this port. So instead of just going on an angle or something like that, I want to try and get this nice and straight, but do like a little S bend and try and make it kind of like a nice funky little bend. Now these are trimmed down, not perfect, just roughly, but I'll try and see if I can show you how sort of out this little bit is. So perfectly straight, it's looking at about there. So it doesn't need to be much of a dog leg, but if I do it like that, straight in, it's just going to ruin the whole build. It's just going to be too much of an angle. So I want to try and keep the tubes like this, but just sort of favor to the left a little bit. So we'll try and get this on video and we'll see if I can get this first go. Okay, so once again, we'll heat this up. So we'll keep it the same orientation. So I'm going to put it down here and I'm going to sort of do a slight dog leg and move this bit. This bit has to go to the left. Now I don't want to do it too close up to here because we're going to still cut this down a bit to make it fit. Now we don't have to heat this up very much because we're just doing a slight little curve. The dog leg is in and you can see it just lines up perfectly. So it comes out a little bit, dog legs to the left, and then this just drops down. So what I'm going to do is cut this down to size, a little bit up here and a little bit in here, and then we'll install it. Now I trimmed down each side of that tube run and I've got it installed, as you can see there. So it's nice and straight up here, goes out nice and straight, and just dog legs to the right. Now that was a tough bit. It does look a little bit curvy up here because the dog leg we had to do was so minute. It would have been better if we could have actually had a bit more to play with. We could have done a nicer dog leg, but that's sort of what we had to go with. There were other options we could have done. We could have used a few right angle fittings and sort of changed it around a bit, but I want to try and use the least amount of extra fittings as needed. And bear in mind, once you get coolant in your loop, it really sort of hides all the little tube marks that you've done in your bending and that. So you don't have to get your bends 100% perfect. If there's not a perfect curve or something in your bend, don't worry about it. Once you get coolant through it, it really does clear it up and it does look much better. All right, so that's most of our sort of tube runs done. I've actually added this little one up in the top right corner. That was just a little straight bit. I did use fittings. There are certain areas where you need to use fittings, and I believe up there was an area to use fittings, and I just added a straight little bit. I've added an aqua pipe. These things are a must. This is the into the reservoir. Without this, if you don't have your reservoir 100% full, which is hard to do, if you don't have the aqua pipe in, it means that your water is going to be shooting down and it's going to be causing a waterfall and sort of a turbulence effect, so you don't want that. Whereas this can be submerged under your coolant level and you can have your coolant level anywhere of the height of the aqua pipe. So I've installed one of those. The last thing we need to do now is our GPU block, just this single run here. I'm not going to go through doing this. This is just one straight little bit. We can use a random offcut we've got anywhere. We just have to measure these two ports and that's it. Now we'll let you know that there are other options you can use when doing your GPU block. I know that Bitspower offer you a bridge, which is one of these. This is similar to what other brands have. So instead of using two standard sort of bridges they come with and installing it with fittings and that like this, you can just whack on this whole bridge. So you take these two off and you whack on the bridge over here. Now I do like these. It gives it more support and you use less fitting. So however much these are worth, $40 or so, it saves you having to use all the fittings in between, but that's really up to you. Some people like using fittings in between, sort of like this, but on some of my builds I like to use the sort of terminal bridge because it's much stronger. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that in and then we'll see the build afterwards. We're just about at the stage now to fill this system up. I'm not going to go into too much detail on filling the system up. The previous video I covered that quite a bit. So if you do want to look at how to fill up the system similar to this one, check out that video, because I spent quite a bit of time on that. So I'm probably not going to cover that this time. There are a few little things that I want to just note now. Some things I didn't cover last time. I didn't add this last time because I didn't want to go into too much, but an area to look at is having a drain port in your system. So drain ports are quite simple. You can either buy a dedicated little drain port fitting, which is just a valve. You can add one of those, or you can just add sort of a T-piece like I've got on here now, and you can just sort of put the stop fitting in. But bear in mind, if you do need to drain this, you'll have to have sort of a container up close to this, because you're not going to be able to undo this and screw a tube on, because the coolant's going to come out. So the advantage of having a valve is, as it states, being a valve, you can just have it closed. So at the moment it's set to its open position, but you normally have it closed. You can take this fitting off. You can add a drain hose to your system. You can have your system off, say you want to come drain it, you want to swap a video card or something. You can turn the valve, you can release a port somewhere else, because you'll need to release the pressure somewhere else, or it probably won't flow very good. And then you can start draining your system. Now, to me, drain ports are a bit 50-50. If you do open this up to drain it, you're not going to drain your whole system. You can never get all the coolant out of your system, especially you've got a radiator here. This will not drain having the ports up the top. Some of your video cards won't drain because these are lower than where your drain port is. So you're never going to get it perfect. So that's why most of my builds being for displays, I don't worry about the drain ports, because to me, they look a bit ugly. And if you're looking at the most important area to put a drain port, I would say attach it to your res somewhere, because that's going to hold the bulk of your liquid. Throw it sort of at the base where I've done it here. At least when you turn it on, turn the valve to drain your system, you're going to drain your whole reservoir here, which is the bulk of your coolant. And then you'll be able to get a bit more by sort of angling your system to the best ability. So I'm going to leave this on here. It does look a little bit obscure sticking out here, but it does add the feature of having a drain port. All right, so what I'm going to do is fill this up. As I said, I'm not going to go over it. It's just going to be quite simple. I'm just going to use one of these extra ports on the multi-port res cap, fill it up slowly. I'm just going to power the pump. So I'm going to just sort of hot wire the PSU with one of those 24-pin adapters. Just start that up. Each time when it sucks down the coolant, make sure you never run, this is a D5 pump, make sure you never run them dry. So once you see the coolant sort of disappearing, turn it off, fill it back up, and then keep on repeating that cycle until your reservoir is full, and then you've got your loop is running through a cycle. So I'm going to run that through. Then after that, we're going to go through some of the maintenance with your system, choosing the right coolant. I won't go into that now. Choosing the right coolant, the different types of coolant, and also things like what you should do before you fill your system. I'm not going to do that now. I think I'll do that all at the end. Things like, do I need to flush this fully? Do I need to run stuff through this before my coolant? And things like that. So what I'll do is I'll fill this up and then we'll go over those. So here's our final build, and as you can see, it doesn't take a lot of actual skill to actually get a build looking nice like this. We just did a few basic bends, kept it all tidy. We threw in some Mod Guru sleeve cables, and you can really see how nice your system can look. Now, before I finish this video off, we are sort of running out of time. I just want to go over some things that I mentioned before, like maintenance for your system, and if you should do anything before you build it. Now, when it comes to your radiators, I do like to flush the radiators with hot water, not boiling water. Just run them through for about 10-20 minutes of hot water. That'll just clear out any particles that are inside it. Now, when it comes to selecting your blocks, I recommend going with blocks that are nickel plated, or you can just get the standard raw copper. Most companies, I know, I'm not sure if Bitspower do, but EK will give you an option. You can go with like the true copper design or the nickel plated ones as well. Now, when it comes to selecting your radiator, I recommend going with radiators that have copper fins and brass chambers. Most of the higher end radiators will do that. I think actually probably most of them do that these days. Now with your different tube types, as you can see, I use PETG in here. I have used acrylic before. PETG is slightly easier for bending, so if you are going to do a full bending loop like this, I would suggest going PETG. And then the other advantage with using these two types, the hard tube over the flexi tube that you may have used in the past, is these tubes do not stain. You're probably used to using coolants with dyes in, and no matter what you do, it is nearly impossible to stop clear flexi tubes from staining unless you get a solid color tube. So that's another advantage of going with the hard tube. Then the last thing I want to talk about is the coolant types. Now, as you can see, I've used some real fancy blue stuff here, but bear in mind, a rule of thumb is, which I sort of keep to, is the fancier your coolant looks, the more work you're going to need to maintain your loop. So this stuff here, so we'll start at the most least maintenance. So something like standard demineralized water, throw it in a biocide or a little mix of glycol, a few drops of glycol or a kill coil, and you'll be able to go for a year or so without having to clean out your blocks and whatnot. Whereas if you go with a dye, they'll start to sort of leave more sort of things behind, a little bit of buildup. And if you go with something like this, whether it's EK, Coolant, whatever, the pastel, the opaque, even the Aurora, which isn't meant to be used full time, but even this stuff, which is your more fancy, the company's going to hate me for saying this, but this stuff is really sort of for show builds. It can be used for a long time, like I use it in all my builds, but if you're a novice that's starting this off, it's probably not best to jump into this because you need to sort of keep an eye on your system, make sure nothing's sort of building up and whatnot. So probably if you are going to go with this, I would probably keep an eye on your system every 3 to 4 months just to make sure everything is going good and there's nothing wrong with it. So any signs of it would be like restrictive flow, any weird noise coming from the pump and things like that. Now apart from that, the only other maintenance you need to do is you need to keep your eye on your water levels. I've had people ask me now, do I have to fill up my system every week or so? I've had systems before where I've never had to fill up the water again over say a year or so. Once you have a large enough res, it really doesn't change that much. And then apart from that, you just have to keep an eye on the dust in your radiators. Now you don't have to clean the dust out, but with having fans in front of them, your radiators will build up with dust and get lots of dirt in them. So it is advised, just like a normal case, if you've got air cooling, you do need to clean out your radiators just with a brush or something like that. But yeah, that's pretty much it for all of this. I'm not sure if we'll be doing another video. I guess we'll wait and see how the comments go, and if anyone has any more specific sort of topics and questions that we can narrow down again, we can probably do another video. But I just want to thank Q-Rotary for reaching out and giving me the chance to do these videos. I want to thank all the sponsors for pitching in for all the hardware, and I want to thank you guys for watching this, and hopefully you guys can learn something from it. So thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for next time.